Hello, everybody. Good morning, good afternoon, depending on where you are joining us today from. My name is Sarah Dorr. I am the Director of Professional Development at the International Studies Association. I know that not all of you who are joining today are members of ISA. So, for those of you who aren't familiar with the International Studies Association, it is the largest disciplinary organization dedicated to transnational and global affairs, and it is currently in residence in global affairs at the University of Connecticut. So, today we have a very special guest joining us today, Dr. Holly Hansen. Holly is a teaching associate professor in the political science department at Oklahoma State. And she is going to be talking with us about building syllabi and how the process of developing syllabi can actually inform your teaching philosophy and can be reused and recycled and reinterpreted later on in your career. So just a few housekeeping things. We have this set up as a webinar. What that means is that if you would like to ask a question, you can write it in the Q&A or in the chat feature, and then I will get to that when we pause during our discussions. And we will be sharing the slides after, as well as a recording of today's session once it's ready. So with that, Holly, I am going to turn it over to you.
All right. Thank you, Sarah, for the introduction, and thank you everyone for joining today. So just to get started, I figured that I would give you a little bit of a background for what inspired this talk, especially because I don't want to come across as being an expert in pedagogical research by any means, but more that this was something that thinking about syllabus design is something that I've been thinking through, especially the reality that these past few years of dealing with COVID and then now with AI and a changing student body, has made me really rethink the way that I did syllabi and began to seek out sources with our local our university's institutional teaching and research center as well as other sources online. And so today's plan is to sort of share some of these sources that made sense for me as I worked through kind of, I guess, a crisis in teaching design, and hopefully will be helpful for other scholars no matter what stage your career you're at. The plan for today to kind of go through our schedule is, if I can get all right, there we go. Um, is that I'm going to focus first on kind of unpacking this hidden curriculum of course design. I know that when I went through as a graduate student, I was not trained in how to design a syllabus. We got a lot of training in how to do research, but not a lot on exactly how do you put together a syllabus. And so I think that I started where everyone else did, which is I copied the syllabus of my existing professors, which didn't really work at first. So talking a little bit about that hidden curriculum and especially where it connects more broadly into not just in your classroom, but within this broader university setting, which is something, again, that I don't think we talk about to beginning scholars and instructors. I'm going to spend most of my time, though, talking about the student-focused syllabus design process, especially a process that I've learned, or that I've come across, that's common in pedagogical research referred to as backwards design methods. And it's one method of doing syllabus design. I'm not going to say it's the best method. There are pros and cons, but it's one that has worked for me. And it's one that I do recommend for other people who are starting out on syllabi. And then I know that even if I think that especially these first two sections are going to be really geared toward people who are maybe beginning their teaching careers. These later two are hopefully of use for people who are maybe thinking about not only going onto the job market, but going up for tenure, promotion, or reappointment proceedings, especially because most institutions, no matter what country or kind of what like where you are in the world, there are some institutions that are not going to prioritize teaching, but I think many of them, and especially I feel like that if you're here today, you're at an institution where teaching is part of the tenure and promotion process. And so how do we make sure that we put our syllabi into this broader narrative of your success as an instructor that will set you up for success in your career? And then at the end, I will actually turn it back over to Sarah to introduce the ISA New Teaching Resource Repository and some of the resources that are on there. I know that we have a few of the app that for people who registered who are interested in foreign policy. So I know that there's some really great foreign policy that their classes for foreign policy syllabi that are up there that I think are available to check out right now. So I will put my own little kind of plug in it for it at the beginning and then let Sarah talk about it more at the end. There are going to be kind of pauses in at different points in this webinar for you to ask questions. And I think that the ISA team with and Sarah is going to help monitor the chat as well to make sure that I don't miss anything. Um, and can kind of continue on with the smoother presentation. But there will be time for questions as we go through this today. So starting out just a little bit with the basics of kind of the hidden curriculum of the syllabi. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on exactly what goes into a syllabus. There is a slide here on some big elements and a few resources uh, that in constructing a syllabus that you might check out, including WashU has an actual template you can download if you're brand new to starting your syllabi. But there is one section of the syllabus that I am not going to be talking about today very much that I think is really important, but is something that maybe transfers across different syllabi, is your policies and expectations. Things such as what do you expect, how do you expect students to behave in the class? What are your late policies? How do they contact you? Nowadays, what is your policy toward AI? I think that these are really important, especially if you're like me and dealing with a changing student body. We have a lot of students who are not necessarily prepared for the culture of college, and so laying out these expectations, I think, are very important um, for both the student and the instructor, so that you have a framework where everyone can begin the semester. But I am not going to spend a lot of time there because I'm going to be focusing on more, I think, the substantive things that are specific to each course. So that being said, moving on to exactly when you're thinking about syllabus design and especially where syllabus fits, I think that the biggest mistake a lot of instructors make is that we usually write the syllabus to the instructor, not the student. And that it is a great document for us. And I think that from a professor's standpoint, a syllabus is a fantastic document. If it's done well, it keeps you organized. It also can set up good boundaries between you and the students. One of my policies, I tell my students, I don't email during the weekend. This is an important mental health boundary for me and them. And that's great, but that's not necessarily, I think the most common complaint instructors have is that the students don't read the syllabus. Well, why would they when you didn't write it for them? You wrote it for you. But I think that it's also we are aware that students are interested in the syllabus because it's laying out their expectations on what you want, what they need to do to succeed in your course. And so that's very critical to them. But we don't often think about the role that the syllabus does play in the broader administrative structure of a university system and an institution within departments or divisions or whatever your centers, whatever your institutional structure is, but also the broader institution in general. And I think that that's something that as a beginning instructor, I wasn't aware of. And now, as somebody who spent some time as a former director of undergraduate studies and had to do all this paperwork, I have some appreciation for um, the administrative side of syllabus design and how important it is for universities because syllabi from that administrative side too is they play an important role in faculty evaluations, especially for tenure and promotion. Uh, they are also critical for students if they are transferring between universities and they're transferring credits. Syllabi are the documents that are being shared to make sure those credits are going to transfer properly for a student. And so having syllabi on record that are transparent on what exactly was learned is really critical. It also, if you're teaching a core course, it may relate to fulfilling department or general education requirements, or even relating to institutional accreditation or program affiliation. That's something that we as instructors don't think, but it often is a really important, and when we're designing syllabi, these are elements that we do have to consider, especially if we are touching on a course that is part of an accreditation for a program or for a university. And that's something that they don't tell you as a beginning instructor, but it's good to know. especially because that often requires you to put specific things into your syllabus that may not be something that you would have thought about. In fact, I would usually tell students or new instructors, even before you start writing your syllabi, you need to do some research on the class you're teaching. And especially if you're new to the job market, you've gotten a new job, first, congratulations, it's a rough job market, but also if you are brand new or entering this job market, ask for the course catalog description. If you can't find it online, it should be online. But the course catalog description, see what's in there. If you're at an existing institution, maybe check to make sure your course catalog description, which is what the students are expecting when they go into the course, is matching up with what you're actually covering. Especially if you're in a long-term position, a lot of us tend to forget to update our course catalogs. And especially nowadays, with some, I think, issues that have gone into the news, this is even more critical to make sure that what we're teaching is matching what we're telling the students we're teaching. But the course catalog description might give you an idea of what specific topics are expected to be covered. You also should check to see if there are other departmental or things like general education requirements that you have to fulfill. Are there specific learning outcomes or topics? If you're in your departments, is this core part of the major? Are there certain topics that are expected to be covered? Uh, is your class being used for assessment in some ways? Our department is undergoing an assessment discussion, and we're actually thinking of moving down some assessment to some of our lower level courses, which means you have to build in time for whatever a paper or an exam or whatever they're using for assessment in your syllabus too. And that's good to know going in before you have to force it into a syllabus you've already put together. Similarly, that from my own experience, I teach a lot of general education courses, which our university requires. For those of you who may not be familiar with that, these are sort of courses from different, like basically different fields to give students a broad academic training. And to be part of the general education program, we used to have to demonstrate, we used to have very specific writing assignments that needed to fill those requirements. And that had to be in our syllabi, what the writing assignments were and how it matched the general education requirement in case our course got audited. Because if it wasn't in the syllabus and our course got audited, we could lose the general education designation, which impacts our course numbers. So definitely something that we want to make sure is transparent and that we try to communicate to our new faculty here. Similarly, there might be something relevant to requirements for competencies that maybe you're not aware of that are university policy that you should ask your either a chair or a head, or if you have a director of programs that do coursework, ask them about if there's any requirements that you're not aware of that they would be able to point you to. And then the final thing, and especially as somebody who started, I am very well aware of the joys of going out during a recession. Started my career teaching at a few teaching colleges for uh, and liberal arts colleges for my first few years as visiting before getting to my more permanent position here at Oklahoma State. Is that it's good to know what sort of students you're dealing with. I think that we're aware of the difference between lower and upper level undergraduates and graduates, but I think it's also important to understand the student body, especially for new faculty coming out, is a student who's going into a liberal arts college. These are institutions that are usually uh, wealthier. Many of them tend to be on scholarships. Class is often a full-time commitment. They're not trying to balancing two or three jobs alongside their coursework. They're going to have a lot more, I would say, just mental capacity to be a student than somebody who's like at a state college like I am, where the students are working part or even full-time. They're dealing with lots of variation and basic skills coming in. And I think that you need to consider what your student body is when you're thinking about putting together your syllabus to make sure that you're not that you're reaching out to the level that they're at and not teaching again a course that makes sense to you but not to them. And so I think this is the sort of questions that are good to think about, is making sure that you're covering your administrative angle but also keeping that student focused element as you're putting together your own document as well. So those are things to maybe broaden your perspective of what your syllabus plays into all these different audiences. Moving on to actually, okay, now that you have done your research and you've kind of thought about where you're starting, now how do you actually put together your syllabus? Uh, and the first thing that I'm going to introduce is a very simple. This is a kind of visualization of the backward design method. And again, I'm going to go from where I started as a beginning syllabus instructor or beginning instructor, where I started by, again, copying what other professors have done, but especially looking at different syllabus and thinking, I like this topic this week, this readings, let me put this into my syllabus. And then I wind up with this weird hodgepodge of a document that the weeks don't necessarily flow together. And so the backwards method is actually a process in which you reverse the way in which you approach your syllabus, where you start with your broad, big picture learning goals. Think about your assessment materials, and then at the very end, think about the readings and instruction, the specific topics you're covering, rather than building like, I want to do these topics, and then trying to think of how they all make sense. So again, this is not the only method out there, but it is one that I found useful. And so I'll go through the specific of these three steps and exactly how would you implement that. First one, which is to identify your course goals. There is now looking at a kind of an older, I have a list of resources, and this book is actually listed on one of those potential resources from a Harvard education scholar looking at like kind of when you're a beginning professor what you want to think about. And I like this idea about your course goals is to ask yourself at the beginning, what do you want your students to know or to be able to do at the end of the semester, or a combination of both? Looking through some of the um excuse me, those of you who filled out the survey when you registered, I think that it was really interesting to see, first off, very clear to me that I was dealing with a lot of people who are not political science. I think that it's fun that we do have the intro to IR and foreign policy and all those fun political sciencey topics, but then also the fact that we have everything from web design and pedagogy and also health and policy and nutrition as um, potential syllabi that you're all building. It also means that the learning goals that you may have are going to vary. Looking through some of them, there were definitely a few of these goals that I looked at this and thought the person who was doing the Intro to Web Design course had designing and building websites. That is definitely a doing goal. Versus there was somebody who was doing the European Union integration that had this idea about understanding fundamental concepts in the context of the EU. These are definitely what I would consider these knowledge goals. And your courses are going to be a mix and the match of them depending on what makes sense for you, especially if you're doing a skills course versus a maybe a substantive topic. But there's like these a lot pedagogy has a lot of these different like levels of learning that you might be encouraging. I like this idea of knowing versus doing. And so that's how I tend to think of it. And so what does that mean specifically? Is the way in which you approach this, maybe build a broad vision for your course, what you're seeking to do, and then break that into smaller learning goals first off. These learning goals, one of the things that, especially as I've been helping mentor a few new scholars on their syllabi recently, I had somebody come in with 15 different learning goals, and I pointed out to them that is not a list of learning goals. That is your semester schedule. And you jumped ahead. Limit yourself to 4 to 6. I think less is more here, and especially because you have to think about these are the things that students aren't going to be able to maintain everything, but when they walk away from your class, what is the absolute minimum they should be able to do? And everything in your syllabus is going to be judged on is it matching these goals? And if it's not fulfilling it, these may be topics you can cut. So that I think is what are these learning goals? How are you doing that well? When you're writing your learning goals, use active verbs, things like describe, apply, analyze, create. It's not only a buzzword word kind of reason to do this, but also because it's going to set you up better for assessment. When you think about create, that means that you're actually going to produce something. If you're describing something, that might mean that your assessment will be asking them to write a paper or maybe a essay. So what is your learning that using these active words will translate more easily into how you're actually going to measure that learning. You want to, so it sets up those assessment strategies. And one of the things that you may also do, because it's hard, we're not trained to write learning goals, and they may make sense in our heads, but not to other people. And especially because the role of these learning goals is not only for you to judge your syllabus and what you're trying to put into it, but also for your students to get them excited about what they should be getting out of this course. And what's interesting to you may not resonate with other people. So you should ask your colleagues, maybe go if your institution has a teaching and learning center, go and ask them for feedback or even plug it into AI. I throw my like I use Claude. I've or started using Claude, and I have Claude give feedback. I write up my learning goals, and then I ask Claude to pick them apart. And I think that AI can be really useful as a critic, especially on something like this, where they have a broad, not just our field, but a more broad perspective to bring in. Here is an example of some learning goals from one of my courses, the Global Political Economy course. This is the first course I kind of applied this technique to, emphasizing some goals which are identified on the like how to know versus to do. Uh, I also start the course just to make sure that my learning goals are matching what the students expected going into the course catalog. I do include the course description, but I think of the learning goals as here is my take on what that course description means. And so, and for me, it's not just a political economy course. Because I'm not a political economist, I can't teach that as a formal class. I'm at heart a conflict mediation person. And so this is a policy course for me. And somebody might teach it differently, but at least I can identify for my students, these are what we're getting. We're going to cover this information that you should know, but here's what we're actually doing, and especially setting up some of these designing and communicating, we rely a lot on simulations and also some presentations of papers. So that really allowed me to translate these learning goals into the vision I had for measuring that learning. So once you have that, your learning goals, you then think about what is going to be your big assessment. And this is it could be a final exam. It doesn't have to be, but whatever your big assessments, one or two big things that you're going to be doing as part of the semester to see if your students are picking up these learning goals. Um, so if you think about this, like what are the students going to know if your learning goals are what are the students going to know or do? This is the question of how do I know if my students have changed from where they started to where they are now? And this should help determine your learning goals should help shape the assessment method and the tools. These are assessment method is actually, this is a kind of newer terminology for me, but it is a philosophy about what you're judging. And especially, are you using a direct strategy where you're actually trying to measure the students' growth, or are you going to do something more indirect where you want to get students' reflections and perceptions of their learning? Both are valid and can give different things, and it's really going to be up to you to decide which is the method that you think makes sense for your course. Um, I know that at least one person was interested in the topic of AI. I am not going to cover that. I will say that you should think about whether you want AI resistant or AI supported assignments here. But I will point out that maybe put in a plug for some of the other virtual programming. I know that we had a earlier one this year that I attended on actually AI resistant assignments. And I know that ISA has been doing a number of events on integrating AI into pedagogy. So hopefully, probably seeing more soon too. So check out them. And I'm sure Sarah could probably point you to the website where you can find some of these sources. But I think that especially in the age of AI, I've taken this as a chance to be creative. I used to do the traditional research papers, but in a period where the computers can write a lot of this for them, I've relied more on oral defense. And so what that has meant for me, one of the most AI resistant assignments I found has been simulations. And I've been a CFR, a Council on Foreign Relations Education Ambassador for the last couple of years. So I will mention their resources because they have some really great simulation materials, especially for people who are interested in foreign policy. One that I used, my very first simulation was on regulating TikTok, which was in the news at the time. Uh, and one of the things that I really appreciated is that you could build these assignments to include some technical and research components to it, but having the live debate and even the like going to recess and having them talk to each other allowed me to really see the students applying that information that I wanted them to learn. And especially the students who had the AI writing, they were very much lost in these simulations. And so I think that there's some really exciting opportunities to change to things like research posters to either supplement or go alongside or replace even research papers. Podcast, videos. There's a lot of, I think, opportunities here. But as somebody who uses simulations, these do take a lot of time and to set up. I have students doing research. I want to spend some time maybe doing some media literacy training with my students. I want to have some drafts written. I want to also build in not only the simulation, but the debriefing, which is where a lot of reflection occurs in a simulation. And so one of the things that you want to do is once you decide whatever your assessment is, think about what you need to do to prepare your students to successfully complete that assignment, that assessment, that activity, whatever you're doing, and put that in first before you put in all these readings or anything else. Put the assessment schedule in first. Now that you have the assessment in and you know at this point how much time you have left in your semester, now you can start thinking about your learning experiences, your class topics, maybe weekly or daily, whatever you prefer to do, any readings, lectures, any additional homework activities that are really building toward those big assessments. This is what you will put in kind of in these smaller sessions. One of the things that I think as a instructor, this was so hard for me to learn. And so I will, at the very least, hopefully hearing somebody else say that it is okay to cut topics if they don't relate to your major learning goals. I've mentioned this in I wind up as our department has a lot of people who do international relations, and they're all conflict scholars. I wind up teaching the political economy section because as conflict mediation, I'm slightly less conflicty than them. But how this relates to cutting topics is I also teach our intro to comparative politics course. And that course is really focused on democracy and democratization and economic development. I don't cover political violence, even though this is a topic that is in my wheelhouse. And while it pains me each time, if I don't have time in the syllabus for everything else that I want to do and this topic, that's the first thing I'm going to cut because it doesn't fit my learning goals. It's not fitting these big themes. It's something that's fun for me, but it's not fitting these big goals. And I can also kind of count that the students are going to get it in a different course if they continue on with our major. So it's okay to cut topics, and it's something that I've had to do. And I think that especially important to think about less can be more, especially if you're dealing with students who are experiencing a lot of mental overload, or if you yourself are going through some mental overload. It's sometimes better to focus on quality versus quantity of instruction. Like, what can you actually do with the time that you're allotted? Also, cutting some of these substantive topics can give you some space to do more high impact and active learning activities. And there's a lot of research that things like simulations or active learning or flipped classrooms, um, where students are actually working through things, are way more effective than building lectures, that they're going to learn more from those activities. And so we're in a world where the students are getting information all the time. Having some time where they can slow down and try to absorb that information is, I think, a really valuable thing of the college experience and something that a lot of professors don't think of building, especially when they're new professors. All right. So finally, wrapping up, you think you have your syllabus complete, but you may not have a format. It's probably complete for you. It's probably going to, especially if you've done your research, fulfill the requirements of what the administration is going to want, but it is going to be geared toward the students. Is it really student focused? And it's a little bit better than maybe if we started from the readings and then built the learning outcomes, but it can be made even more. And so these are some additional edits. These are optional. Some faculty like to have one document where everything's in that they can point to, but this is not going to be a document that students are going to read, and you really shouldn't expect it of them. It's something you can point them to when they have a question. So if you're comfortable with saying it's in the syllabus, be prepared for that. But if you actually want students to read the syllabus, here are a few things you might think about. You could have your full professor syllabus that goes to any administration or is kept on file, and build a separate student syllabus that is real focused on what the students specifically need to learn. Focus on building short paragraphs. Take whatever you wrote, shorten it down, do bullet points, something that is going to be more easily skimmable, especially because I think just like we're overburdened, so are our students. And so the easier you make things to read, the more likely they are going to at least glance over your information. You might add visuals. This is something that I kind of resisted for a long time. And then I saw the research on this that especially I don't add visuals in my grad syllabi, but I do for undergrads because I think that especially for lower level students, it's a chance to get them excited about the themes of the course. I usually include a course theme visual. Maybe I like to include the textbooks, especially if there's multiple editions. So that way you're communicating to the students, get this one, not whatever one you found online, that they get the correct edition. I've seen some people do grading as graphical representation rather than a table, and like kind of like this is an A. I don't like it, but some people do this. And then also one of the things I've started doing is kind of a picture for the weekly themes. I will say Canvas has been or Canva has been great for pulling off uh, like easy pictures that the Creative Commons pictures that I can plug into these sources. But even if you want to go visual, be very mindful of accessibility concerns. I've had a student who was d dyslexic that really made me rethink how I did syllabus design, where visuals were really good for them. But I've also had students with some that needed to rely on readers, that the visuals created a lot of problems for their readers. And so this is something to keep in mind, that you want to make sure that you're not going to. I've seen people try to do infographic syllabi, and I'm not sure that that's necessarily accessible. So you can be, I would say, don't go too crazy, but try to find a balance that again, makes sense for you. Another thing that a lot of faculty don't think about is we've been so used to syllabi being one document, is that we are in the era of digital design and learning management systems. You don't have to have it all in one place. And so you could what I this is I've liked this term, decentralize your syllabi, by either in your syllabus doing hyperlinks to, if your university has specific policies or your department has policies. I took out my entire section on plagiarism because the university has their plagiarism discussion in the code of conduct that I could just link to. And so I've done that. Academic integrity, code of conduct, grading policies. If you can offload that, if you're following the university's policies or if there's something somewhere, you can offload that into a hyperlink. You also might think about any of your personal policies. You can drop that into whatever your learning management system is. We use Canvas. I do different pages, which are like, okay, here are assignment expectations. I don't put a lot of details of my assignment in my syllabi because they're all on Canvas, and it takes me a lot of time to update everything in the syllabus and then transfer it over to Canvas. I just keep everything in Canvas. I also there's some of my policies about classroom behavior I put in my syllabus, but my AI policy I have on Canvas because that becomes more relevant when students are doing those assignments. And so some people put their contact information I have a special contact information page on Canvas. Again, faculty are going to have different levels about, I kind of like having readings in my syllabi, but some faculty just they tell the students to refer to their learning management system for their course readings. I would say once I started doing these things, my political economy class, uh, they still don't read all the details, but they're aware of some of the bigger policies at the very least. But I think that I actually cut down, even with adding in pictures, my political economy syllabus was basically cut in half by starting doing some of these things. And that is a lot more of an accessible. A 10-page document is way more accessible than a 20-page one. Or a 3-page one is way more accessible than one in which is again 20 pages. So those are again different faculty are going to have different levels of what you're comfortable with putting in the syllabus versus not, but these are things that you may not have thought about that I at least am going to put out there that you could put down on your list. So there are some additional resources. I've mentioned this before. If your institution has a teaching and learning center, they can be a great resource, especially they can give you feedback on how you're designing syllabi, but not everyone is at an institution that has those resources. So if you don't, here are some sources that I found once I started doing some research that I've kind of kept on my like saved tabs that I refer to as I'm going through these things and especially as I've been putting together these slides. So these are some additional sources that you can check out if you're at an institution that doesn't have these resources. But I figured that we do a little pause here to do any questions you have in the syllabus itself before I move on to some of the career discussions. So,
I'm not seeing anything in the chat at this moment.
okay. Well, I guess if anyone has any questions that you want to put into the chat, I also have some time at the end before we go on to the or after we finish up. So feel free to add it into the chat and I will address them at the end. Okay, so moving on to the next part is to think about, especially if you're at an institution that does prioritize teaching as part of the hiring, tenure, and promotion proceedings, you do have to think about putting together a teaching portfolio, and your syllabi should be major documents within it. But I think one of the biggest mistakes I see people making here is that they put in the syllabus, but they don't really give you a reason why, as somebody who's been on hiring committees and in designing this, I've talked to a lot of people doing who are been on recent tenure and promotion cases. Um, that they get a lot of people give people syllabi, but they don't sort of give the committees the resources to understand why that syllabi is important, other than, hey, look, I can teach the course you want, but more of, okay, well, but how are you teaching it and how does it fit into a philosophy of teaching that they're going to be looking for? And so I'm going to talk a little bit about that. And especially for those of you, this is maybe if the front end was maybe geared toward people who are at the beginning of their teaching careers, this is probably going to be something relevant for those who are thinking about tenure or promotion, no matter what level you're at. So first off, how your syllabi can impact your teaching portfolio is first off, it can inspire your teaching philosophy or statement, especially your learning goals. I'll talk about specifically how do we go from looking at your syllabi to building your statement, because a lot of times I think that we come up with a philosophy, but these are really hard to write because we don't really know what our philosophy is because we're thinking about our philosophy, but not thinking about our philosophy in how we actually apply it in the course in the classes, and your syllabus is how you're doing that. So your syllabus can be really important. They're really important. Syllabi are important for providing evidence of teaching effectiveness. I saw this quote of syllabi demonstrate your intent of pedagogy while your evaluations are showing how the students are receiving it. So the students or other faculty, if you're doing faculty evaluations. They can also help make the invisible work visible. Especially one of the courses that I teach regularly is our department's research methods course. This is really heavy on the workload. We are doing constant assignments. And so when I go up for tenure and promotion, I can emphasize that I am teaching this course, which is much heavier than many other courses in our major. And the syllabi allow us to do that because this is often something workload in the classroom is frequently underlooked. Uh, you can also use your syllabi, especially if you design your promotion materials properly, to show how your teaching vision matches your institution's strategic goals. And that's something that, especially as you're going up in promotion, showing how you're fitting with the broad vision of the university helps demonstrate this alignment that's really important for long-term career success of your institution. It can also, if you have revised your syllabus in response to being on a committee, I am currently revising some. I always revise my methods in my methods classes in response to what the department has decided. And I've also helped with methods committee revisions. You could talk about your syllabus in your service statement as well. It's like I implemented these changes within the department as part of this committee, and here's how I actually implemented them into the classroom. So taking what we did in service and actually translated it into a product, that looks really great on a in a portfolio in your materials, your promotion materials. And it's not something a lot of us think about, because I think that we think of the syllabus as I've done this and now I go teach and now I'm done with it. But it can be part of this broad engagement that you are trying to demonstrate that including. So how do you actually do that? So oh yeah, so I mentioned that already about like curriculum committees. Putting into your service section. So there's certain parts of your syllabus that can directly translate into different parts of your teaching philosophy. Your learning objectives, especially if you have multiple syllabi to compare, you can look at like kind of common themes and show how this connects to broad pedagogical values. And so this allows you to especially build out your opening statement. Like, I value these things in my learning, and I can show in my different courses how I'm seeking to achieve them. For me, I think I've been relating a lot to the idea of global literacy. There's a transition through all my courses, and how that relates to both knowledge and skills and perspective taking is something that's allowed me to, I've really updated my teaching statements to reflect that very specific language that I can then point to for very concrete evidence. Because let's be honest, most of the time teaching philosophies, you see a lot of them and they're very fluffy. So it's nice to have some substance behind them. Uh, your reading and assignment scaffolding. So how you're building the course and as you're going through that can reflect your theory of how students best process and learn information. I do a lot of, and kind of tying in with the last one, assessment methods. I like to do active learning whenever possible, experiential learning. These are what we call high impact practices, which is the sort of thing that deans and committees love to hear. Looks really good on your promotion materials. And so I could talk about, oh, in this course, I did this thing, and this was really important for demonstrating how it's important for students to take ownership of their learning, and how what I do in the course transitions into that. It can also highlight your assessment and methods can highlight the values you want your students to develop. So it's not just about what are they learning substantively, but what are they actually trying to, what do you hope for them to achieve on their own and to grow as people? Which that, especially in an institution that is going to prioritize teaching, is very important to communicate. There are a few select kind of reflection questions. Again, I know that we're going to be sharing these slides, so I'm not going to go through them individually. But as you're putting together your philosophy based on your syllabi, or maybe updating your philosophy, these are some questions that might help guide you, that you can kind of go through your syllabi and answer, that could translate into what you would actually talk about in a philosophy statement. Uh, but I think that especially as we're thinking about putting together your syllabus as evidence of teaching quality, that committees are going to be looking to evaluate on one or more of these things. And this is, I'm doing very broadly a few major areas. It's going to vary by institution on maybe what's prioritized. I would say more research institutions are going to highly prioritize intellectual engagement and rigor, while I think teaching institutions very much are going to be interested in inclusivity, evolution, and student-centered design. And so you're going to have to figure out, don't do all of them. You can't do all of them, especially not without building a portfolio that's too long. But think about what are the one values that fit with what you're doing, and then how your syllabi demonstrate those values. And I would especially point out, again, I mentioned this before, something that we don't often think about, how our syllabi relate to alignment and coherence. Both within the syllabus, how do your readings reflect these broad learning objectives, but also does your university objectives match university policies? Our university has adopted a civic engagement as part of its strategic plan, which as a political science major is great for me, because I could talk about how I focus on global civic engagement and how my courses are really geared toward building that knowledge base and skills base that allows students to be globally engaged and globally aware. And so that's something that I'm able to say that I do, and then point to specific parts of my syllabus where I can achieve that. Um, Finally, as this is actually kind of to wrap it up, some best practices as you're putting together your teaching portfolio and thinking how you're going to use your syllabi. Some things that and this is I feel like I would love to hear people's ideas for other things you've seen people do or have been really successful. But here's some things that I think have been cool or people have mentioned or I've seen or I've done that I highly recommend. One is adding a brief reflection memo for each syllabus in your materials. Not to the syllabus itself, but just a short paragraph on why somebody should read that. What are the main things they want to get out of it? Because just like your students don't read the syllabus, if you don't give a job hiring committee or your promotion committee a reason to read the syllabus, they're going to also flip through it and move on. So what worked, what changed maybe, and why you think this is important. That little reflection memo can really help make this actual true evidence and not just something you're checking off the list. One thing that you might do, and this is something I've started doing, showing evolution by pairing old syllabi with a revised version and point out, maybe highlight the changes that you made, especially if it's in regards to student feedback or faculty evaluations or from attending some workshops that you did. This highlights your ability to evolve and learn as a scholar and an instructor. And these are things that universities, especially teaching institutions, will love to see. You might connect your syllabi to department goals or institutional learning goals, either in that memo or more broadly in your teaching statement. Um, you might want to especially focus on highlighting what you think are the strengths of your reading list. Is it cutting edge scholarship? Are you engaging in current events or policy events? Are you really good at bringing diversity of perspective and authorship? Again, we're not going to be able to do any, like all of these things. This is probably going to be a lot to ask for somebody, but look through your reading list and see what you think you're really good at and emphasize that in your teaching materials. Like my syllabi are really good at doing these things, and look, here's where I'm actually achieving them in the courses. Um, this is a little trick to the same thing applies to, like, if you're going to write grants, make sure you're hitting the key words of in like the grant wants you to use. If you're going to be writing your teaching materials, make sure you're using the same keywords in your portfolio and your teaching philosophy, and especially if those keywords connect with maybe things that your institution has highlighted as big goals, then that kind of makes nice, easy skimming that is going to kind of shout out at people of how these things are all interconnected and make it a little bit easier for people to connect all these things for you in your as you're going up for promotion or reappointment. And of course, you probably heard this. If you're going to have syllabi, don't just put your best ones in, put a representative range. Um, Lower level, upper level, undergrads, grad. Um, though it's not always possible. Different institutions, some people are teaching the same thing over and over. Some people are teaching 8 different courses over the course of like 2 or 3, like a year or two. Um, so this is going to depend on who kind of where you are. But if you have a lot of different teaching experiences, having a representative range of syllabi demonstrates how many students you're reaching out at different levels, and that's also something good that the university may help prioritize. And so at this point, I'm going to wrap up my side of the presentation, and I will turn it over to Sarah to talk about the ISA's new teaching resources.
Thank you so much, Holly. And I love the idea of annotating a syllabus to show evolution, even just for your own personal record, right? To show progress and your own learning experience. We did have a question come in the Q&A that asked how long your syllabi are on average.
So that depends on the course, I would say first off. My grad courses are long. They're a little bit more on the traditional side. I put all my readings in. I think because that's what grad students kind of expect to see, and they're not going to be as,
Mhm.
let's just say, if they've gone on to grad school, they are committed to learning at a level that the students, the freshmen in my gen ed course, are not necessarily committed to. So the I have my intro to comparative politics course that I'm producing for, and I'm actually going to be uploading this to, I think, the ISA teaching resources soon. I just need to remove anything that is, I use a lot of things from the pictures from the textbook that I want to make sure that I have Creative Commons pictures instead so we don't get any legal problems. Um, that. if I remove the readings, which I have my version that I'm turning in to our department, which has all the readings in it, and that's going to be the version I'm uploading to to ISA. The version I'm actually handing out to my students is 3 pages long.
Okay.
And so, because I've cut all the readings and it is just bare bones, here are the learning goals, here's the grading, point breakdown, here's a list of what percentage everything is, and here are some big expectations. And I specifically say my AI policy is found on Canvas.
Hmm.
So that's I could have cut it down more, but I like having my course expectations, especially because we're dealing with a lot of I think first generation college students, and that's a very specific population that needs a little bit more, especially for freshmen, a little bit more of an idea of what you sh how you should be acting in the classroom and beyond it. So
Hmm.
yeah.
Holly, do you ever set out in your syllabi things like office hours in terms of so exactly what an office hour is? Because I've had students who maybe aren't familiar, might see that on the syllabi and but maybe aren't familiar with the fact that this means that a student can come and stop by and drop in to see you at a set time in the week.
Yeah, so that's actually something that I put it in the syllabi, well, sometimes. I definitely have, so I have a page on Canvas, which is like contacting. And on the first day of class, I pull that information up, like how you can contact me, here's my email. But I put that sort of information on like office hours are for you. I'm here to
Mhm.
help you and I'm happy to talk to you. But I also repeatedly say to my students, like, hey, office hours are this week, especially if we have an assignment coming up. I will stress to them that because I think a lot of them have had professors, and I think that this is important too, is that if you have students who are coming uh, from high schools, maybe where you only went to see the teacher if you were in trouble,
Mhm.
or especially first generation students that may not know that, or some people who've had bad experiences with professors, because there's some professors who can be very hostile to students in office hours. So I think it's important to communicate to the students that no matter what experience they previously had with office hours, your office hours, especially if you want them to come in, are for them. And I think
Mhm.
that that's something that repetition is the only way you're going to be able to do that. So it's nice to have that statement on the syllabus, but I think that that is something that I think needs to be reinforced daily in the classroom.
Right. And just to highlight, I think that the point I wanted to make is that there's a hidden curriculum in writing the syllabus, but also for students
Yes.
understanding the syllabus
Yes.
too. So I am on the International Studies Association homepage and I am logged in. So this would only be accessible to people who are ISA members, but you can you see my screen? Yes. Okay. So this is ISA's new resource library. There will be three different sections. At the moment, the academic career section is available, and we are currently building out the teaching and learning section as well as the research and publishing section. So Holly has mentioned the resource repository and the repository submissions. So I will take us to the resource repository. This is a new tool that ISA has, and we invite people to submit. Um, we have here filter by type, different types of documents. So we have syllabi, we have simulations, AI inclusive assignments, AI resistant assignment. If you developed something that worked really well in your class and you're an ISA member and you would like to share it with the wider ISA community, this is something that you can contribute to. We also have teaching statements and technology statements. So let's see here. Filter by type, additional filters. We have different languages, academic levels, tags, and class size. So there are really different ways to sort what you're looking for. And the more people that contribute to the teaching resource repository, the richer it will be, and the more useful to the wider range of people. So I see here Holly has a syllabus. So we see right away it's global political economy, it's undergraduate upper division, and we can take a look at it, right? And this is all information when submitting that you can choose to include or not to include. Um, we see that there are different ways that it can be taught, asynchronously or synchronously, and the objectives. Okay. And we can download the file, of course, and then access the syllabus. Let's see. I think because of screen sharing, it's going to be a little difficult to share the downloaded file, but it did in fact download, and I can open it on my computer in case you can't see that process. Um, Here we have foreign policy, um, right? Comparative foreign policy, China and international relations of East Asia. This is a syllabus in Portuguese. Actually, there are quite a few in Portuguese from Marcelo Valença. So let's see if we search, see like Asia. Let's see if something comes up. Ah, no, did not work. Filtered by language, filtered by tags. Ah, here we go. Um, let's see if there's any in relation to climate change. Not yet. So but here you can see that there's an overview of different subject areas that you can tag with your when you're searching for a syllabi. And here we have the submission guidelines. So, are there any questions on the teaching resource repository? It's a very new resource for ISA. We just released this in the very beginning of March, so it is growing. Um, and if folks have any questions about it, I'd be happy to answer them. In the meantime, since I don't see any questions, I want to highlight that we have an event that was shared in the chat using AI for teaching and research statements that people may be interested in. And that is going to be on Tuesday, June 2nd from 11 to 12 a.m. And that is open to members, ISA members and non-members. I don't see any additional questions. Holly, thank you so much. I'm definitely going to be integrating some of your suggestions in the syllabi that I designed for my course in the fall and for future iterations of it. I really appreciate it. And we will follow up with sharing with all the attendees for sharing the slides and the resources that we talked about today.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Sarah, for organizing it, and thank you everyone who attended. It's great to promote more pedagogy at ISA. We have some great community of scholars that I think it's nice to be able to tap some of that energy.
Wonderful. Thank you so much.